in Africa, that pink African is the beginning of the European. Now, the pink African also started to undergo certain changes, like ice produces a narrow nose. The parts of Africa, you have Africans with narrow noses too, because dry heat produces the narrow nose. So that man is one. There are no races, really. You have the African as the beginning of the human race, but the others are mutations. They're not races in the true sense of the word. Race is a social concept. That was to come later. And after the slave trade, when Europe conquered Africa, etc., then blackness and color became associated with being in a low position, so that therefore colors and races became associated with certain things. Those are things that are going to pass as we recover our history and transform ourselves. But initially, you have the pink African who becomes the European. He undergoes certain changes over a period of time. For example, in the ice, it's important to have long hair to protect the neck from cold. In heat, it's important that you have short hair follicles so that heat can escape. These things have nothing to do with inferiority or superiority. They have to do with
environmental needs.
Environmental necessities, environmental imperatives. So that you would find in Africa, some people have narrow noses where there's dry heat. Some people have thinner lips, some people have fuller lips, some people have close cropped hair, some people have wavy hair, etc. This has nothing to do with inferiority or superiority. It doesn't even have anything to do with beauty. Because the first great Europeans who met the first great Africans, the Greeks, when they went to Egypt and they met the blacks, they thought black was beautiful. It was quite the opposite, because the first whites were so startled by black achievement in Egypt and so many whites came to study in Africa, in Egypt, that they associated great intelligence and great beauty with blackness. They actually began to take black gods, because the first, for example, Europeans started to worship Isis, the black goddess. They started to have temples to Isis. Eventually, later on, Horus, who was the son of Isis and the son of Osiris, the male and female aspects of God, Europe initially worshipped the black Christ. So that this kind of racism that later occurred after the slave trade, this assumption about blackness associated with inferiority, that's a later thing in history. And you see, we are overwhelmed at the moment by that period, so that we have forgotten what really happened in the history of the world.
So the first human beings on Earth, when do they appear?
They appear, we have found a man just last year. We found an African taking a walk with his child 4 million years ago.
Okay, now
we found this complete skull. We found the whole skull. There's absolutely no question. He is not as developed as we are today.
Okay, that would be hominid.
Yes, he is the first hominid. But modern man with our brain, occurs about 140 to 150,000 years ago in Africa. We have been able to trace it. We have traced it through the blood that the mother of mankind, and this is not Lucy, because we found a creature we call Lucy 3.5 million years ago, an African too. But the first mother of mankind, a black woman, is about 140,000 years old. We've been able to trace it through the genetic structure. We've been able to establish clearly that the first human, true modern human with our brain case, etc., is an African woman about 140,000 years old. She has all the genetics, all the genes rather, of the human race. Then you have the African fanning out. African goes up into Europe. The transformation occurs about pink skin, and then the ice would produce the long hair, the retention of long hair or the long hair follicles, etc. Some people in the ice remained black. For example, the Eskimos, many of the Eskimos remained black because they had another way of dealing with the problem. Instead of having pink skin where melanin is not active, enabling the sun rays to come through, the tangential sun to come through and vitalize the body, the Eskimos had fish oils. They had seals and things like that. So it was necessary for skin change.
What is the fish oil? What does it have to do with anything?
The what?
The fish oil. How
Okay,
does affect
that
anything?
would provide the vitamin D that was necessary to vitalize the bones.
Oh, okay.
You see, that vitamin D was coming from the sun. Therefore, if you have very black skin, and that in that ice age, it's easy in temperate zones. Anybody could exist in this zone. We're not talking about temperate zones. We're talking about real ice. There were parts of Europe where ice was half a mile thick. Okay, so that it became an advantage to have the inactive melanin, so that the tangential sunlight, the slanted sunlight, which is less than African sunlight, could penetrate the skin. Okay, so that these are things that have to do with environment. They have nothing to do with superiority or inferiority.
And so for approximately how many years was the world populated exclusively and only by Africans, black Africans?
Okay,
black skin.
if you're talking about the modern, the last
sapien,
African, okay, because you see, the African is not only the first hominid, he's also the first human. Okay, the hominid is not completely human like us, but then comes the first human with our brain case. That's also African. And this begins to change about 55,000 years ago in Europe, where you get Africoid types becoming Caucasoid types, where you have what is called as Cro-Magnon man. This is the what we crudely call today white man, as against what we crudely call today black man. Okay, they're really just human beings. Okay, but they undergo superficial changes, skin changes, etc. And later on, you would have other changes like the narrow nose in ice versus the broader nose in heat. But you'd have the narrow nose also in dry heat. So that you would have superficial changes in the face of man, related nothing to his intelligence, his brain or anything, related to the environment, the amount of sun, the kind of food you eat in particular environments, the kind of qualities of heat, qualities of cold, etc.
So this first baby, put it on that level, this first child probably would have had kinky hair.
Oh, yes. Yes. Because that was necessary. Okay, in the climate in which it evolved, that was necessary. Curled or kinky hair, that would be necessary. Okay, and black skin would also be necessary. Because the albino, as I say, like not the stabilized pink, which came later, but the albino in my country dies by the time you're 30, because the sun would ravage you. Okay.
Just briefly, if you would, just explain what melanin does. If you
okay, melanin is protects the body in a certain way.
It's the pigment that gives us our color.
Yes. It's a pigment that gives you black or brown color, but it also protects you to some extent from the sun's rays. Okay, like for example, in parts of South Africa, in parts of Australia, etc., we find lots of pink people have cancer. Skin cancer. Okay, so that if you were living in a tropical climate, especially if it's an extreme tropical climate, it is very advantageous to have black or dark brown skin. Okay. What we have also found is that we have misunderstandings about body shapes and face shapes, etc. The African has 6 faces. They don't all look alike. They may all be black or brown, but they have all sorts of faces. Like, for example, you have the Somali. People thought that these were mixed people. These are pure-blooded Africans, no mixture. They're in a different zone.
They thought they were mixed because...
Yes, because they may have the narrow nose, for example. When many Africans have narrow noses because they're in dry heat. Okay, so that people made all sorts of stupid mistakes. It's only now we begin to realize you have ranges of African, you have ranges of other types, but the African has more ranges than any other people.